There's a millennial individual sitting at their desk on a Tuesday afternoon, and they are trying to locate the moment when the plan stopped working. Not because anything catastrophic has happened. The job exists. The apartment exists. The relationship is real. There's food in the refrigerator and money in the account and a functioning life by any external metric that gets applied to functioning lives. The plan, technically, worked out. And yet, there is a gap between what the plan was supposed to produce and what it has actually produced. And the gap is not dramatic enough to justify complaint and not small enough to stop noticing. The millennial individual did the degree. They did the internship, the unpaid one, then the paid one. They networked at the events they did not particularly want to attend. They saved the percentage of income the articles said to save. They delayed the gratification in the ways that delayed gratification is supposed to be delayed. They followed the instructions. The instructions were for a different outcome than this one. Not a worse outcome necessarily, but a different one. And the millennial individual is sitting at the desk on a Tuesday afternoon trying to understand how someone who did everything right still ended up somewhere that feels, in its quiet way, like the wrong place. The script that the millennial individual was following was not invented by anyone in particular. It was assembled from a set of cultural messages that were delivered with remarkable consistency across multiple channels throughout their childhood and early adulthood. Work hard and the work will be rewarded. Get the degree and a degree will open doors. Be reliable and the reliability will be noticed. Delay the gratification now and receive it later, in the specific forms the later is supposed to take. These messages were not lies, exactly. They were descriptions of how a particular version of a particular economy had worked for the generation before the millennial individuals. The generation that delivered the messages, their parents, their teachers, the cultural infrastructure of the 1980s and 1990s had in many cases followed versions of the same script and received something like the promised outcome. The messages were transmitted in good faith. They were also transmitted without the disclaimer that the conditions under which the script had worked were already changing, and that the version of the economy that would greet the millennial individual when they arrived at the working portion of the program would have updated the rules. Without updating the script, the millennial individual graduated into a labor market that was operating on different terms than the script assumed. The internships that were supposed to be temporary proved to be structural. The entry-level positions that were supposed to lead somewhere led more slowly and less directly than the script had advertised. The housing market that was supposed to be accessible at the point when the income was established had moved significantly further from the income by the time the income was established. The retirement savings that were supposed to compound reassuringly turned out to require contributions that the actual salary could not comfortably support while also covering the actual rent. None of these were personal failures. They were structural mismatches between a script written for one economy and a person trying to follow it in a different one. The specific damage this mismatch produces is not primarily financial, though it has financial dimensions. The primary damage is to the millennial individual's relationship with their own effort. The script contained an implicit promise. Effort will be legible as effort, and legible effort will be rewarded proportionally. This is the promise that makes sustained effort possible, not the guarantee of a specific outcome, but the confidence that the effort and the outcome are connected in a reliable enough way to make effort worth making. The millennial individual did make the effort. They made it consistently, often at significant personal cost, across years of deferred gratification and strategic positioning, and doing the right things in the right order, and the outcome was not proportional to the effort. Not because of any failure of the effort itself, but because the relationship between effort and outcome in the economy the millennial individual actually inhabited was weaker than the script had promised. Outcomes were more dependent on timing, luck, structural factors, and inherited advantage than the script had disclosed. The effort mattered, but it did not matter in the way the script said it would. The result of this mismatch, and it is one of the most specific and underexamined psychological effects of the millennial economic experience, is a particular kind of disorientation that sits between effort and outcome. The millennial individual who did everything right and still ended up here is not simply disappointed with their results. They are disoriented in their relationship with effort itself. If the effort does not reliably produce the outcome, what does effort mean? If following the instructions correctly does not lead to the instructed destination, what are the instructions for? There is a specific version of this disorientation that the millennial individual rarely names because it carries an uncomfortable quality of ingratitude. It goes something like this: the life I have is a good life, and I know it is a good life, and I would be embarrassed to describe my situation as a problem, and yet something is specifically not what I was told it would be, and I have spent years not knowing what to do with the gap between the told and the actual dot, the discomfort with naming. This is real and worth examining because it operates as a silencing mechanism. The millennial individual who grew up in relative privilege, who had access to the degree, who had enough stability to do the unpaid internship, who had the network that got them in the room, feels the specific pressure of knowing that their position is better than many. The life that did not produce the promised outcome is still a life that others would find desirable. The gap between the told and the actual feels like a complaint that is not available to someone in their position. This is the trap. The acknowledgement that others have it worse does not actually resolve the gap between what was promised and what arrived. It only adds shame to the gap, and shame to the gap makes the gap harder to examine honestly, which makes it harder to develop an accurate understanding of what actually happened and why, which is the only thing that would allow the millennial individual to stop measuring themselves against a script that was not written for the world they actually live in. The recalibration that the millennial individual needs is not a lowering of expectation. That framing, just expect less, just be grateful for what you have, just adjust, is both condescending and wrong. The issue is not that the millennial individual expected too much. The issue is that they were given a specific script that described what their effort would produce, and the script turned out to be inaccurate, and no one gave them an updated version. There is also something worth naming about the specific cognitive experience of being a high-achieving person in a system that has decoupled achievement from its promised rewards. The millennial individual who did everything right is, in most cases, genuinely capable. The degree, the internship, the networking, the savings, these were not performed. They were produced by real capability, real discipline, real sustained effort over real time. The capability is authentic. The mismatch is not a revelation that the capability was insufficient. It is a revelation that the system's relationship to capability changed without announcing the change. This matters because the millennial individual who is trying to understand why the plan did not produce the promised outcome is at risk of a specific cognitive error, attributing the mismatch to their own deficiency rather than to the structural change in the system. The error is understandable. The cultural messaging consistently frames outcomes as reflections of individual effort and character. If the outcome is not what was expected, the culturally available explanation is that the effort was insufficient or the character was lacking. The structural explanation, the economy changed, the rules changed, the relationship between effort and outcome shifted at a systemic level, is available but less culturally supported, and requires a form of external attribution that the high-achieving millennial individual tends to resist because it feels like excuse-making. It is not excuse-making. It is accurate accounting. The recalibration is a different thing. It is the honest acknowledgement, made without self-blame, that the script they were given was written for a different economy, and that the fact that the script did not produce its promised outcome does not mean the effort was wasted or the person is insufficient. The effort produced what it produced in the actual conditions that existed. In a different set of conditions, the ones the script assumed, it might have produced the promised thing. In the actual conditions, it produced the actual life, which is, again, not a catastrophe, but is also genuinely not what was advertised. This acknowledgement matters because it is the prerequisite for the next thing. Choosing what to want now, on the basis of actual conditions and actual values, rather than continuing to pursue the goals of a script whose premises no longer apply. The millennial individual who is still trying to achieve the outcomes the script promised in an economy where those specific outcomes require a different level of resource or luck or position, then the script assumed is working harder than the task requires and still feeling behind because the target has been set by a document that was written for someone else. The Tuesday afternoon desk is still there. The gap is still there. The life is still good in the ways it is good, and different in the ways it is different from what the script said it would be. The millennial individual who did everything right and still ended up here is not someone who failed the script. They are someone the script failed and who deserves, after years of following instructions that led somewhere other than promised, the space to ask what they actually want in the actual world, on their own terms, not the terms of the degree or the internship or the networking event or the article about how much to save. Their own terms, the ones that emerge when the script is put down and the actual life, with its actual conditions and actual possibilities, is looked at directly for the first time. That is what the Tuesday afternoon desk could become. Not the place where the wrong version of a plan is still being executed. The place where the right questions are finally being asked. There is one more thing worth saying about the specific loneliness of this experience. The millennial individual who did everything right and still ended up here is surrounded in many cases by people who are also doing everything right and are also at various stages of noticing that the promised destination has not arrived. This is not a private experience. It is a generational one. But because the cultural framing of outcomes as individual reflections of individual effort makes the structural explanation feel like excuse-making, and because the acknowledgement of the gap feels like ingratitude in a life that is objectively functional, millennial. The millennial individual almost never says this out loud. They do not say it to their colleagues, who are probably in the same position. They do not say it to their friends, who they assume have figured it out better than them. They do not say it to their parents, whose script they followed because saying it feels like an accusation. The result is a generation of people quietly carrying the same specific disorientation, the gap between the script and the life, without knowing that most of the people around them are carrying it too. The silence is not because the experience is rare. It is because the framework for discussing it does not quite exist. And in the absence of a framework, the private interpretation prevails. Something is wrong with me specifically, rather than something was inaccurate in the script we were all given. This is the beginning of the framework. The gap is real. The script was inaccurate. The effort was genuine. The life is not a failure. And the questions that the Tuesday afternoon desk has been waiting to host are available. Finally, when the script is acknowledged as the wrong document for the situation at hand. Thanks for watching. If this felt familiar, leave a comment. And the next time you feel behind on a script you did not write, consider whether you actually want what the script was taking you toward, or whether you simply followed it because it was the script.